Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Stephen and I'll be your moderator this evening. I'm very excited to welcome Renee Susami, Senior Designer with the Henry Schein Integrative Design Studio as our speaker tonight. Renee will be discussing design trends for making small spaces feel large and inviting. And before handing off to Renee, I just want to mention 2 points of housekeeping to keep in mind. Firstly, if you have a question at any point during this evening's presentation, please go ahead and type it in the box labeled "Have a Question," and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And the second point is CE is not available for this webinar, and that applies to whether you're attending live or watching on demand. So with that taken care of, Renee, welcome. I'll pass it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening to discuss designing a small space. And I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. I am Renee Susami, Senior Designer with Integrated Design Studio. I have been a part of the team since 2014. And prior to joining Henry Schein, I worked in residential design, commercial design, as well as senior living. So really excited to be here tonight presenting this topic. Before we really dive into our topic though tonight, I just want to give a brief introduction to the Henry Schein Integrated Design Studio team. We have a team of 23 designers that specialize in dental office design. We work in collaboration with our equipment specialists throughout the country for really any type of project. So that would consist of new builds, remodels, and expansions. We offer an array of different service offerings from dental space planning, 3D visualization, equipment and technology specification and placement, and interior design finish selections. When developing some research for this topic, we really wanted to dive into the why. The why being, why have we noticed a trend of more and more offices coming our way that seem to be a compromised square footage? And there are a lot of contributing factors to this reason. First and foremost is just the current economic climate that we are in right now. Secondly is startups wanting to reduce their overall construction costs as well as have a reduced construction timeline. Going small for a lot of offices means that they have a greater reach for the more ideal demographic or patient base that they're looking to serve. And for a lot of offices, they're in a situation that they might not actually be looking to build or looking to lease. They're kind of stuck within their existing footprint of their current practice. And so they're currently looking at ways to optimize the existing square footage that they are currently residing in. Regardless of the case, though, I think it's important to assess how do you get the most out of your dollar. So what can you do to improve or accommodate additional types of treatment procedures? What can you do to draw more patients, new patients into your practice? And how do you accommodate new technology that we've been seeing come out in the last couple of years? So regardless of where you are currently in the process of either practicing in your existing practice and looking to remodel the space, or you're looking to build a new practice, you really need to start out by defining your practice goals and practice philosophy. And to do that, it's really important to identify who your main demographic is. So for example, you could be a general practice dentist that is serving mostly young adults between the ages of 20 to 30, or you could be a general practice dentistry that is really serving a large group of families where you're seeing age ranges from 2 all the way to 92. So identifying who your demographic is going to be really key in defining your practice goals and philosophy. You also need to identify how many treatment rooms do you need to support practice growth. And does the space that you are planning to build in or the space you're currently occupying allow for future expansion, room to grow, or even bringing in a specialist? Depending on what type of specialty procedures you're looking to incorporate into your space can really dictate the sizing of the treatment rooms, as well as hallways, access for wheelchairs or gurneys. So kind of identifying your overall goal for either now or the future is important. Also taking a look at your overall staff needs. Do you need a private office? Do you need a business manager's office? What kind of staff support spaces do you need your space to encompass? And if you are looking at lease spaces, analyzing what the building can offer you, such as, are there public restrooms available outside of the suite? Or are you required to have an ADA restroom within the suite? Does the building offer a place for your dental mechanicals, or do those need to be located in the suite? So we're talking about leases a lot, and I think it's really critical to talk about this point because our team experiences this a lot when we're working with a new doctor on a tenant space. And when analyzing lease spaces, you may come into two different terminologies, one being usable square footage and the other being rentable square footage, both of which have totally different square footage calculations and really can impact the space that you're occupying. So usable square footage is defined only as the space the tenant will occupy. So in a dental situation, it's a space with that the dental practice will be installed, if you will. Rentable square footage, though, is not only that space that the tenant will be occupying, but also other common amenities to the building, such as lobbies, public corridors, stairwells, elevators, restrooms, utility closets. So why this is important and why I bring it up in this presentation is because you could look at a space and it lists out 2,500 rentable square footage. However, when that plan comes to our team and we do our square footage calculation, we realize, oh no, you really only have 1,900 square footage. So when you are looking at lease spaces, always ask the question of what is my usable square footage and what is my rentable square footage? So some things to consider when looking at a lease space is our team uses the basic calculation of 400 square feet per treatment room. This calculation will really provide you with the most ideal layout that would include all of the support spaces that your office would need to practice and function. It would give you items like bulk storage, a nice size, large waiting room, business office, private offices, staff lounge, etc. When looking at lease spaces, it's also good to kind of stick to spaces that are rectangular or square in shape. We've all seen beautiful spaces with grand curves and a lot of interesting angles, but all of those items will really impact the overall flow and how we can lay things out. And it's also really critical to try to find a space with minimal obstructions. And this is kind of a hard thing to nail down, but obstructions meaning structural columns, low ceilings, load-bearing walls, a room with a ton of existing mechanicals. And why these are important to look for is because you could have a square space that's 2,000 square feet with no columns, minimal mechanicals, and then you could have a square space that's 2,000 square feet riddled with columns, load-bearing walls, existing mechanicals, and your usable square footage, what you're able to design in and around, is going to be completely different because of those obstructions. Another thing to think about when analyzing and looking at various lease spaces is the existing accessibility into the space itself. So our team follows a ton of codes that are listed down at the bottom, ADA, ANSI, IBC, and it's really important to find out if the current space you're looking to lease meets the standard local code guidelines, because if not, you may be required to update those items to code. For instance, an example would be if the only way to access your building is through a set of stairs. You may be required to add a ramp. So all of these things play into factors of how that space will get designed and laid out. So again, something critical to think about when you are looking for lease spaces. And lastly, if you're looking at spaces that are a tenant space that's within a larger building, finding a space that offers common areas like restrooms or storage might be a huge benefit, just because you may not be required then to have a restroom within your suite. but you could still want one for the convenience factor as well. Oops. So what is considered small or compromised? So this is very tricky for us to define this question because it really is dictated by the practitioner and their needs. Every doctor practices differently. Every doctor is offering different types of amenities and services. So that's really a question that the doctor kind of has to analyze for themselves, obviously with Integrated Design Studio's help. But what we would really consider small is anything that takes that square footage that I mentioned before of 400 square foot per treatment room, and it's reduced down to that 300 square foot per treatment room. So for instance, if you have a 2,000 square foot building and you want to run with the 4,000 square foot calculation, you would have around 5 treatment rooms. Whereas that 300 per square foot, you would be falling in more like the 6 to 7 treatment rooms, 300 square feet per treatment room, which would give you 6 to 7 approximately. So with that smaller square footage per treatment room, you're going to end up having more compromised spaces. It's also good to note too that we're seeing a bigger trend in the last few years, where in the past, an ideal startup would typically start out with 5 operatories or treatment rooms. And now we're seeing a trend moving more to 6 to 7 for most startups. So that doesn't mean that the actual space that these startups is taking is larger. We're just seeing more reduced size in that 300 square foot per treatment room. So let's say you're moving into that, 300 square foot per treatment room scope. There are going to be things that you need to consider compromising on. So it's really good to maybe start thinking about your just general practice philosophy again, but also considering areas that you can possibly cut back on space. So one would definitely be the waiting room in your business office. Again, this is strictly based on your demographic, but you could potentially greatly reduce the size of the waiting room. Having a couple seats, lounge style seats or benches, can just support minimal wait time. You could also consider utilizing self check-in kiosks instead of having multiple people working at the front desk to help reduce space. Another recommendation we make when you are having a compromise on space is aiming for flexibility. And what we mean by that is that instead of, having your traditional business manager's office, consultation, your space may just not allow for those 2 additional offices. So creating an oversized treatment room that has a consultation desk within it might be a good solution when you still need to have an area to sit down with the patients to discuss treatment planning or finances. And this would eliminate the need for those 2 other office spaces and keeps everything within house of that treatment room. The only caveat to this would be a longer turnaround process within that treatment room, but you're also freeing up space in that business office for checkout and things like that. So really just evaluating, your overall clinical processes. Another thing to really kind of think about is, do you define treatment rooms versus hygiene rooms, or could each room be set up identical to one another? Are you able to reduce any in-room cabinetry? Instead of the traditional operatory layout with 2 side cabinets, can you reduce it down to maybe 1 side cabinet? Maybe even considering a central hand washing station instead of a sink in every treatment room could help save space as well. So whenever we're looking at compromising space, I think one of the key areas that gets cut, usually the first, is a staff lounge. And just given, again, kind of the world we're in right now and staff retention, we want to ensure that your staff members feel appreciated and comfortable. So we definitely don't want to ever eliminate the staff lounge, but instead thinking about the idea of flexibility, creating spaces that could maybe be more dual purpose. This also goes in line with private offices. Treatment rooms are where the value lies. So possibly instead of a private office, consider small alcove spaces that, again, gives you the ability to have some privacy, catch up, do some emails, what have you, but doesn't require such a large footprint that we've seen in offices of the past. I really love this image here on the left because I think this gives a great example of a staff lounge that is offering great amenities for the staff, a team meeting area, but we've also taken 3 rooms here on the right-hand side that can be cross-functional. So we have a consultation room, but it's accessed from 2 points. So one is off the staff lounge, one is off a common corridor hallway. So again, this could be used as a touchdown space for business manager or staff meetings. We also then have this consultation workroom. Maybe this could serve as a sedation room, or it could also serve as a private area for any staff members to go in, sneak away, take a phone call, catch up. Same goes for the room down here in the bottom. So just getting a little bit more creative on how we address spaces and thinking of them as dual functional and not just for a single use. So to build out a dental office, obviously there's equipment needed, and equipment can really dictate the size of a lot of the rooms that we lay out. So we wanted to take some time in this presentation to discuss some ideas and considerations when it comes to equipment needs. And I will say we do have a Henry Schein equipment rep on this webinar for Q&A after. So if you have any specific questions regarding equipment, I know Lindsay would be happy to chime in at the Q&A session. But we're just going to kind of run through this. And I will also say, too, that our Henry Schein equipment specialist team is great at answering particular questions. So first and foremost, imaging alcove. In today's world, we really don't design any practices without having some sort of CBCT machine, whether it's 2D or 3D. It is typically always a must. And even if you are planning on not purchasing one right away or installing one, it's always important to carve out a space for this piece of equipment for the future. It's also an area, the imaging alcove, that typically is cut down in size, especially when spaces are compromised. So it's important to note that the room sizing required for the imaging alcove is really dependent on the specific piece of equipment that will be installed. And whenever we are designing these spaces, we want to think of accessibility and mobility for the patient and the operator. So we always want to incorporate a 3-foot opening just for ease of entry and accessibility into that space. A solution you could use if you're tight on space would be to install the imaging alcove at the end of a hallway. This would avoid high traffic areas so that your operatory or your corridor with your operatories would still be able to be utilized while an image is being taken. So sterilization is really what can make or break an effective and efficient workflow within your office. Our team uses a rule of thumb for every treatment room. We want to have 2 linear feet. This really ensures that we have enough room for the proper equipment to be placed and also work counter space for wrapping and things like that. There's a lot of solutions, especially with our dental manufacturer providers, that can offer various ways to maximize that footprint of your sterilization. So things like wall storage is a great solution. I think we have some awesome images down here of 3 different layouts of dental offices and just how they've maximized the use of their sterilization space. One tip is also, if you don't have a ton of space and you're really looking to maximize, is instead of having sterilization in a separate room, having it accessed off or recessing it off an open hallway. This is great, again, for a space saver, but also allows you to kind of market your cleanability and your sterilization process with your patients. Dental lab has definitely changed in the last couple of years. in the past, since I've been with Schein in 9 years, about 4 or 5 years ago, I definitely saw a trend where labs were needing or being requested to be smaller and smaller and smaller. And I would say in the last 2 years, we've actually seen the reverse of that. Now with all of the new digital lab equipment that's available. So regardless of what you're planning to do or the type of lab work you're planning to do with your practice, it's always critical to plan for the future, because you never know when you're going to want to add a mill or, all of these new digital lab equipment technology that you may want to incorporate into your service offerings. But for a traditional lab setup, that would be your model trimmer, your lathe. We're really kind of aiming to have 6 to 7 linear feet. For the digital lab setup, we would recommend a minimum of an additional 5 feet. One thing I really like about this image here of this lab is that they clearly were working within an existing footprint. They have, it looks to be about 10 linear feet of lab space. But they've incorporated some of their new 3D digital lab equipment, and they've actually stacked those pieces. So it takes up less room, less footprint, but it's still functional. So here again is just showing kind of spatial requirements for some of these new digital lab equipment pieces. So again, we'll want to have a minimum of 5 feet for, let's say, the 3D printer, wash unit, cure unit, and then 5 feet for the mill and furnace. So, again, it may be something you're not initially planning on incorporating into your practice, but carving out a small space to give you the flexibility to add these in later on is always good planning. Dental mechanical. So dental mechanical is kind of the heartbeat of your practice. Without the air compressor and vacuum, you definitely will not be practicing that day. So it is critical to plan and have enough space for these pieces of equipment to function and operate. And also, if it goes down, you need to have room for a technician to be able to come out and service those pieces. There are some solutions of dental equipment, air compressors, vacuum that do require a smaller footprint, and I would recommend consulting with your Henry Schein equipment rep on those pieces and if they're a good solution for your practice. But another option, and this is something we do all the time, is proposing a stacked air compressor and vacuum. This really minimizes the amount of space that these pieces of equipment require versus being side to side. And the stack rack is something that can be provided by the dental equipment manufacturer or by your contractor. So getting into where space is really critical is the treatment room. And I think I want to point out that the arrows that you see on the screen indicate all of the considerations members of our team take in laying out a functional operatory. So there's quite a few considerations, and all of these measurements reflect different requirements. So accessibility and entry into the room. We also want to lay out an operatory that is fully ergonomic for practitioner, hygienist, assistant, whoever is working within the space. The depth of the room, again, is really dependent sometimes on the type of delivery that the dentist is practicing. So whether it's four-handed, over the patient, side delivery, all of those items or all of those things require different clearances and proper distances for ideal ergonomics. And lastly, we always want to consider that equipment reach. So whether it's a side delivery unit, an x-ray, a wall-mounted light, all of those items fall into how big or how small these operatories can be. So some space-saving solutions would definitely be cabinetry. So in that image that we just saw, it was 11 foot 6 deep room by 10 feet. With that sizing, we're able to get 2 side cabinets, a rear cabinet, and that really is the ideal layout. However, you may not have 10 feet for every treatment room. So some things you could consider is removing a side cabinet, or like we see here on the right-hand side is we've taken a smaller 30-inch side sink cabinet with trash bin, and we've scooted that all the way down to the toe end of the room. This really opens up the area that the doctor and assistant will be working in, so it's not as cluttered. And just by moving that cabinet all the way down to the foot end and going with a smaller side cabinet, the room itself will appear larger. One other thing you can consider as well is, instead of having a traditional 42-inch rear cabinet like we see in this upper right-hand image, you can reduce it down to a 36-inch rear cabinet and really be able to pick up some more space. So for instance, in this operatory in the upper right-hand corner, I believe this operatory is 9 feet wide, but by dropping that rear cabinet from a 42 down to a 36, we were able to pick up 6 additional inches, or reduce the room by 6 inches. So doesn't sound like a lot, but over the course of, 8 treatment rooms, that can build up quite a bit. Another thing you can consider as well is taking the sinks out of the room and just having a centralized hand washing station like we see over here on the left. So we have 2 ops and 1 sink cabinet between. One thing to note too, it's not always about the width of the room, but the depth of the room. So 11'6" is our typical room depth. And then also you typically have a 5-inch wall behind that rear cabinet, but sometimes, you're really running tight between the wall and the hallway. So removing that rear wall and having the rear cabinet serve as the wall kind of can solve a lot of problems when it's coming into a really tight hallway space. Also, a lot of the dental manufacturer equipment manufacturers create these rear cabinets to kind of serve as a standalone wall, if you will, as well, with storage access from the hallway side. Your equipment needs really are going to be dictated by, again, the doctor's preference, what type of procedures are going to be done in that room. So it's really critical that when you are getting to this point and you're going to be working in with a compromised space, to work hand in hand with our equipment team. This is a great example, this image here, of a DCI equipment piece actually that was done custom for a really tight solution. The doctor wanted to have a side sink cabinet with some storage, and DCI was able to actually create something custom and unique for this situation. So we have a side sink cabinet with additional work surface, and then also a built-in recessed niche. So, for additional storage requirements, and it doesn't eat up as much space as the traditional side cabinet would. So again, working with a dental manufacturer to create some custom solutions is always an option and is available. So moving into just some other ideas for small space solutions, and I've kind of mentioned this in the previous part of the presentation, is really aiming for flexibility and kind of thinking outside the box and how space gets utilized. So one thing we wanted to talk about is just the idea of considering taking a single space that may be multi-purpose. So in this example, we have our staff lounge, we have a conference room, and we have a waiting room. And in this solution, the doctor wanted the ability to open these 3 spaces up to one another to be able to maximize or increase the size of the waiting room on days where, lots of families are coming in, or they know, mom, dad are bringing 3 to 4 kids with them at a time. But they also wanted the ability to open it up too, so that their space could be transformed into a training facility. They didn't have the space for a standalone training room, but what we proposed doing was actually creating the space to having sliding doors between them, so that it could all be opened and become one large meeting space. So again, just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit for just opportunities for flexibility. Another thing to consider too is kind of maximizing on every square inch of space. So if you have dead space, possibly propose installing a small workstation nook. This could be utilized for a multitude of reasons, from consultation, reappointing, checkout stations that could serve, the patients and practitioners, and really helps free up that business office and gets faster treatment room turnover. Lastly is kind of capitalizing on dead-end hallways. We see this all the time in strip mall spaces where we'll have a long bank of treatment rooms and the space just ends. And what can we do with that leftover dead-end space? So maximizing your storage whenever possible. This space can be utilized for storage, for washer and dryer, for IT cabinets, or just full-size storage. So overall, how to really make your space appear larger. So, we've been looking at things kind of in a 2D standpoint of just thinking of the floor plan, but how, when you're within that space, do you make it feel vast and make it appear like more space than you have? So starting out with kind of designing the interior of your space, it's always important to start out with color. So in a small space, I typically will recommend to our customers to create a monochromatic color palette. So what that means is taking one hue and going lighter or darker with that. I would tend to refrain from incorporating a high contrast color palette. So kind of stick with either bright and light or dark and cozy. One trick to make the space appear larger than it is painting your walls, your doors, your trim, your ceiling, all the same color. And how we keep that from feeling boring then is incorporating a lot of textures into the space. So utilizing different metal finishes, utilizing various finishes from like high gloss or matte accents can really help make the space appear larger than it is. I think glass is a great option too for maintaining openness. I think this is a great image. This is a practice that our team worked on. And here we just have a standard 4-foot hallway with a consultation room. And we easily could have just, wrapped this in drywall, but to make the space feel larger and more open, we were able to incorporate glass just to give a more airiness about it. It's also really important in a small space to incorporate a lot of key design features. So key design features can mean a ton of different things, but in this scenario, we really want to incorporate a really cool, unique looking front desk, incorporating impressive furniture in the space because it is small, and then utilizing different materials throughout the room to draw your eye through the room. So in this scenario, we actually have a very unique kind of concierge style front desk. We've also incorporated a wood accent around this, almost at the top of the ceiling to draw your eye upward. We have a decorative light fixture, and we've incorporated a small alcove for product display. One really important thing, and this doesn't apply to every space, but if your space does have tall ceilings, we really recommend utilizing this to your advantage. So adding some design features such as soffits, beams, anything that really will help draw your eye upward. Incorporating focal point items like decorative artwork, decorative lighting, accent walls with a lot of texture can really create a lot of interest into the space. And I think this is a great example of just, again, showing a treatment hallway. We've applied a wall accent with the board and batten. We also have some decorative lighting that's kind of flanked left and right by a decorative soffit, which helps bring your eye upward. Here's another great example of a hallway view where we've done a board and batten wall treatment from floor to ceiling. Again, bringing our eye up. We've incorporated decorative wall sconces, and at the end of this corridor, we have a nice artwork piece with decorative furniture. For outfitting your space with flooring, we would really recommend keeping it consistent throughout the office. So trying to utilize the same flooring in one open space. So like this image shows here, we have an open bay with a hand washing or brushing station behind, and just keeping that flooring consistent will help the space appear larger and less choppy. If you do plan on incorporating more than one flooring type, such as a luxury vinyl tile and a carpet tile, we would recommend keeping the color and tone similar, and really trying to utilize that carpet to add texture over a large pattern or big, bold pops of color. When designing for a waiting room, especially furniture, scale is really, really key in furniture placement for a small space. So what I mean by scale is if you have a 10-foot, 10-foot long room by 8 feet deep, having a massive sectional sofa in there is going to feel too heavy and in mass and too large in mass. So finding pieces that are smaller in stature will again help make that space feel larger. We also recommend utilizing furniture that's cross-functional. So ottomans are great for serving as end tables, but also can be utilized for additional seating. Incorporating freestanding shelving displays to help divide space and also create some interest is a really good solution. And like this image here on the right shows, this is a great example of some stacked seating. And what I mean by stacked seating is having seating at varying heights. So here we have kind of a bar set up overlooking looking over towards the TV with some lounge seating behind. And by stacking this furniture, we're able to really almost like double the amount of seating we can have in a space. I also think this is a great example, this image of just, again, thinking vertically. So they've installed this wood baffle system with decorative lighting, and immediately your eye gets drawn upward to the space. They also have this really cool dividing wall that helps provide some privacy, but also helps keep things feel open. I think in all small spaces, storage is always something to be desired. So maximizing storage wherever you can. And a lot of furniture manufacturers offer the ability to take a lateral file that can be locked and add on an upholstered seat on top. This is an awesome, awesome thing to incorporate in treatment rooms where you need guest seating, but also are lacking storage. Waiting room, where again, you might want to incorporate some bench seating within the waiting room, but you also need space for just random storage that your office may have. And then again, in these two scenarios, in private office areas, just trying to, again, maximize storage and also seating for guests. And lastly, we will always often get a request that, we want to have some semi-private spaces within the treatment area in an open bay, for instance, or you may have kind of a more open feel waiting room, reception, checkout, but you still want to create some privacy. So incorporating products like what's shown here, dividing panels, is a great resource. These images show a product by MDC, the Zintra panels, which is the image on the left. In this situation, we had a 6-chair open bay that the doctor wanted to create a semi-private space, but we did not have the room to build a 5-inch wall. So we proposed using these Zintra panels. Again, they look awesome, but they also serve a functional purpose. And the image on the right is a product by 3form. So this is a resin panel. Again, it's only about an inch thick, or excuse me, a ½ inch thick. So a lot narrower than a traditional wall would be. But again, we're helping divide up the space with keeping it still easily accessible, letting light through, but providing that additional privacy. So I want to kind of take all of these notes that we talked about tonight or all these ideas that we talked about and apply them to actual practices that we've worked on. So our first space we're going to be analyzing is in orthodontic office. Interior usable square footage is 1,051 interior square feet. The goal with this practice was to have a 4-chair open bay, 1 closed room, and a digital lab. Looking at the space, we had some considerations to work around. We have an existing ADA restroom that they did not want to relocate. We also had an existing electrical panel in the space, which again, we did not want to relocate. And we only had 1 single entry into the space. So here's our proposed layout. So I think overall it laid out really, really well. We were able to get our 4 operatory or 4 open bay chairs within the space. We have a closed treatment room, really nice sized 3D digital lab, and a couple of key items I just want to highlight. So as I mentioned, we wanted to keep that existing restroom intact. In the most ideal situation, you'd have a restroom up front for patients and you'd have a restroom in the back of house area for staff. However, given the square footage, we were only required to have 1. So to help create some privacy for this bathroom and also working around that existing electrical panel, we threw up a wing wall here and also took advantage of kind of this little dead end space by incorporating some stacked lockers. Also for our waiting room, again, try to maximize size and storage. We incorporated some bench seating. We also incorporated some decorative ceiling treatment to add some interest to the space. And to get some additional privacy between each of the chairs, we added a dividing wall panel like we just saw previously. And for in the staff lounge, our staff lounge is actually fairly small, as you can see here. So we weren't really able to accommodate a grandscaping staff lounge, but wanted to still provide a nice area for sit down. So our solution for that was a bar height table with 2 chairs and one other example to help maximize space in the staff lounge too, instead of the traditional 8 top table centered in the room, is to create a banquette with a couple tables and chairs that you can pull up. This takes a lot less footprint than our traditional 8-chair desk, or 8-chair table in a staff lounge. Our next case study is a space of 1,450 square feet. This practice is a general practice. They wanted to have 4 closed rooms, imaging alcove, and sterilization. All the windows and doors needed to remain as is, so we weren't able to relocate any of those existing components. And we were able to, I think, again, really achieve a great overall flow with the space. We have a really nice sized waiting room. We have our nice waiting room. We have our 4 operatories and a couple other items I just want to highlight. So again, our waiting room, we utilize bench seating. So we have bench seating actually in 2 locations. So over here, adjacent to the imaging alcove and directly across from the business office. We also incorporated an IT cabinet instead of a traditional IT closet. This is a great solution when you are tight on space and don't need to have a super large footprint for those IT equipment, mechanical closet. We also incorporated glass throughout the space, just again to help give it a more airy feel. And we incorporated wood baffles down the treatment hallways just to create some interest and draw your eye up vertically. And those are located here. Our last case study is a space that is 1,469. General practice, again, our goal was 4 closed rooms, an imaging alcove, and sterilization. Um, Overall, the space turned out nicely. Again, we utilized bench seating in that waiting room to help maximize the amount of guest seating. And a couple of things I want to point out. So in this space, we actually incorporated a billing nook. This could be utilized for a couple different things, for stand-up consultation, reappointing, again, to try to help free up the person at the business office. We also propose an open sterilization. So we don't have a wing wall off the hall, but it's completely open. And we also have a digital mill area that just, again, helps showcase and market those digital lab components, but makes it also feel more open. And we have a centralized hand washing station to support the 4 treatment rooms. So to conclude, just a couple key things. Deciding to build a small office is really going to be dictated by your demographic of patient base that you are treating. This may not work for every doctor or for every region. When analyzing your space or your goals for your practice, it's really important to really figure out your absolute needs, wants, wishes, and your hard stops before leasing or buying. How small you go in your space or your treatment room size or your support spaces is really truly dependent on how you are going to run your practice and the services you're going to offer to your patients. And lastly, it's really critical to work with a team that will be creative in your design, equipment solutions, and your interior finishes to, again, help maximize your space and the function of it, efficiency, as well as the aesthetics. So thank you, everyone. And I guess we'll open up to Q&A now.
Hey, thank you so much, Renee. Really appreciate that. Wonderful presentation. So yeah, absolutely right. We are going to go ahead and open up to our Q&A session now. You should see highlighted on your screen the have a question box. So we ask you to go ahead and put your questions in that. Now, for the Q&A section, as Renee mentioned, we're going to be joined by Lindsay Mayhall, our equipment specialist. And between the two of them, they'll be able to help answer our questions. So we'll go ahead and we'll ask the first question here. And this comes from Trish. And the question is, how can you maintain patient privacy, HIPAA considerations in your designs?
That is a really great question. So I think incorporating those self-check-in kiosks, like we've shown, where they're kind of recessed in a nook when patients are filling out any kind of patient paperwork. A lot of times, a lot of those additional conversations can be happening in the room. So I guess my question to your question is, are you referring to the front end of the office or the treatment areas? I'm not sure if part of her message got cut off. And Lindsay, I'm not sure if you have any feedback on that.
Yeah, I think you covered it with kind of offsetting it into a nook. It's kind of tough with a small waiting room. But yeah, I think kind of offsetting it into the wall as much as you can. Or kind of creating a separate, maybe a barrier divider that we could kind of do within like the design components that you kind of talked about. Maybe creating some kind of barrier.
Yeah, and I think the only room or the only example that we showed in the treatment space was an ortho bay. So typically ortho bays are designed to be wide open. We have seen a push recently for more privacy, but all of the general practice layouts we showed had all closed rooms. So doors could always be added onto those operatories if you're really concerned about just, more private conversations. Some door solutions would be a pocket door or a barn door that don't require a door swing. But I hope I answer your question, Trish.
Wonderful.
Thank you,
Renee, both of you. No, I'm sorry.
I was going to say another question on the list was kind of like about shielding noise. So, Renee, I know we've done some of the white noise speakers in a couple offices before. Can you speak on that a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of products out there to help with sound. Acoustics is always a concern in the dental office environment, whether you're working in 1,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet. The white noise machines is a great resource and can be added in each operatory. Another great thing to help aid in acoustics is incorporating carpet tile down a treatment corridor, because anything with a softer non-hard surface will help absorb more sound. Adding products like type 2 vinyl, wall covering can help with sound absorption as well. Instead of doing a drywall ceiling, actually having an acoustic ceiling will help with sound. And actually one of the divider panels I showed, the MDC Zintra, is an acoustical based product too. So there's a ton of products on the market right now that can be incorporated in the interior design of a space to help aid in acoustics.
Okay, fantastic. All right, thank you. Hey, let's go on to our next question. This next question is also from Trish Reynolds. Where in your design do you consider ventilation, air direction, and positioning of chairs related to the AC returns?
So that would be really a great conversation to have with your HVAC contractor. That is kind of out of our scope of work in regards to designing the overall HVAC system for an office.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. So next question comes from Gary. Who can I contact to design the interior? I already have the Schein layout.
Yeah, you can contact us. We have our website that we can send you, Gary, a follow-up email after this call with our contact information, and we can get you set up with a programming call or intro call to review our service offerings.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, next question has come from Dina. How would the kiosk work with a patient who has no idea how to use this?
That is a great question. And again, some of these solutions are not for every office. I think, though, with the patient base getting younger and younger, the millennials, we've grown up on devices. So I think a quick walkthrough might be beneficial for the first time a patient has to check in or check out. Lindsay, I don't know if you've had any offices that you've done where they've had some of these kiosks check in, check out.
Typically,
so what do those offices do?
Yeah, it's almost like walking up to an iPad, and it's got very specific instructions. So it's like check in, yes, and like you click through the prompts. So it's pretty self-explanatory to patients. But like Renee said, typically when it's a new patient, kind of walking them through your all's process and how that works and how they would log in.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Okay. Next question. What is the minimum size for a treatment room, an imaging alcove, stereo, etc.?
So I kind of touched on that a little bit on our presentation. Again, it is really specific to the equipment that will be going into those spaces. So for imaging alcove, each CBCT has its own sizing requirements. So working alongside your Henry Schein equipment rep to determine what those minimum size requirements would be key. For sterilization, again, we typically recommend the 2 linear feet per treatment room. So if you have 4 treatment rooms, we would like to see 8 feet at a minimum. I know, Lindsay, you and I typically try to achieve the 10 to 12. Seems to be the most ideal.
12 feet is kind of a sweet spot. It's kind of ideal. It also kind of depends on your layout, like Renee said, of sterilization. Sometimes it's a galley style, so you've got 2 sides of cabinetry, so you can get away with doing a little bit less in linear feet because you've got 2 sides. So it kind of depends on the layout of your sterilization as well.
And then as far as treatment room goes, it really is dictated on your equipment needs for in that space. So in hygiene rooms, a lot of times I've done an 8-foot wide room, but that would only allow you to have typically a single entry into that room. So if you want to have a dual entry room, the smallest you'd really be able to go with a rear cabinet would be around 8'6", but our depth is typically 11'6" is kind of our whole dimension for operatories until we have a better understanding of what type of delivery, what the cabinetry needs are in that room. That is kind of the go-to for designing an op.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, next question. I'm planning a small practice with 3 ops. How many seats should I plan for in the waiting room?
So I think this is another one where it really depends on your demographic and just kind of your overall practice philosophy and goals. We used to run with the idea for every treatment room, we'd want to have 1.5 chairs per treatment room. So that would give us around 6 chairs, 6 chairs in the waiting room. However, with so many new efficiencies like the self check-in kiosk, so many offices still doing chairside or car-side check-in, we've seen a drastic shift in the amount of waiting room chairs that are needed. So I would say that if you're planning on building a 3-chair practice, depending on who your demographic is, you don't see a lot of families, you don't see a lot of kids, you don't see a ton of patients that are bringing caregivers in with them, I think you could probably easily have 3 to 5 chairs for the waiting room. And Lindsay, I'm not sure what you're kind of seeing as a shift in your area, if that is in line.
Yeah, after COVID, a lot of people kind of maintained the car check-in, and a lot of patients like just being able to text when they arrive and then text to be told to come in when it's time for their appointment. So I'm kind of seeing kind of a downturn in how large people want waiting rooms as well. Taking that into account, like pediatric dentists typically still want large waiting rooms. Orthodontists typically still want large waiting rooms because you're just seeing such a high volume of patients and a lot of families and young children. So I think it kind of just depends on the patients that you're treating.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Next question. Do I have to have more than one restroom in my space?
So that's a great question, and that is really dictated by International Building Code and ADA code, as well as the overall occupancy load for your space. So to determine that, it'd be great to work hand in hand with a designer on our team or a local contractor architect. Typically, the rule of thumb is anything over 1,500 square feet. Again, that's usable square footage. You would want to have 2 restrooms. So 2 ADA unisex restrooms for that space. Under 1,500 square feet, we can typically just have 1 unisex restroom for that space. But again, it can vary based on the municipality your space is in, local code, state code. So working, again, with a contractor in your area or a member on our team, we can analyze that specific code requirements for your state.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, it looks like those are all the questions. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I want to go ahead and say thank you. Thank you so much, Renee, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you, Lindsay, also for your input here in the Q&A. Thank you to all of you attendees as well. Thank you for joining us for this event this evening. So good news, we did record tonight's event, and we'll email the recording some point during the next week. One thing that we would love to ask you to do is to just take a second to give us your feedback. So once this ends, you'll see an opportunity to fill out our survey, and that'll be popping up on your screen, and we'd really appreciate hearing from you. So thank you once again to all of you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.